Everyday Football at 4, John McMullen, and football is finally back. Well, at least at training camp. Guys are in the house. Carson Wentz throwing bombs to Deshaun Jackson. Doug Pederson being pithy and talkative at his press conference. Everything seems to be good on day one. Well, for the most part. We'll get to all the news and updates with John McMullen now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. And John has his latest article up on the 97.3 ESPN.com website. Eagles training camp observations day one. John, how are you doing on this Thursday?
I'm doing well. First day of many. So I try not to think of the grind. That's what Doug Pederson said. Focus on today.
Well,
Get better for today.
It was nice to hear because we did play the Doug Pederson presser earlier on Mays and Aton. It was nice to hear. I believe you got a question in for once.
For once? Come on, I always get a question in. You got to read the transcript.
I feel like sometimes the extra people kind of push you out sometimes when they show up for these kind of days.
Every press conference, you'll see my name. I get at least one in.
John McMullen always covers the Eagles for 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles NFL Insider. So a couple of news items that came from the day. One of them was the surprise that Brandon Brooks and Darby were both out there for individual drills. So I think that is a definite positive sign for the Eagles moving forward, John.
Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise, and we joked that, Ian Rappaport had reported that Ronald would start on the PUP list, and Doug doesn't like Ian Rappaport, so maybe that's the reason they didn't put Ronald Darby on there. As far as Brandon goes, I mean, that was the bigger surprise because no one even questioned whether he'd be on the PUP list or not. Tearing his Achilles in the playoffs in January. Generally, that's a 9-month injury. People like Terrell Suggs have done it quicker. But if you think about Brandon and being 350 pounds, it's amazing. And he was back out there. Now, understand all these guys, and it's not just Brandon and Ronald, but Nigel Bradham and Derek Barnett and players like that. They were just doing individual drills. So they're still not back for teamwork, but it is a positive development that they're able to get out there and do some things because it was expected they wouldn't be able to do much at this stage of the game.
Yeah, Ian Rappaport has been wrong 3 years in a row about the Eagles, which is why people need to follow reporters like you, John, who are actually on the ground instead of listening to Rapp.
Yeah, well, Ronald, here's what happens. And Ronald had indicated, he talked to us in the spring and flat out said that week one was his goal. And his goal wasn't July 25th. And understandably so with a torn ACL. So from that standpoint, then you go to the NFL Network, what they do, they kind of regurgitate the information and say, well, he's probably going to start on the PUP list because that's what was expected. And that's what Ronald himself kind of intimated. So it's sort of not that big of a deal. And Ian was just taking news that was already out there for the network and trying to repackage it. And that's just kind of what you do.
John, with Darby being back, what does that mean, though, for the guy who is on the PUP, and that is Jalen Mills?
Well, you understand they play opposite sides of the field. So Jalen's the left corner, Ronald's the right corner when they're starting. And when you're at this point, whether it's the off season or training camp, Jim Schwartz generally doesn't cross-train people. In other words, Rasul Douglas is starting at right corner. He doesn't play at left corner, and he won't in camp. Same thing at left corner. Vontae Maddox has been starting there, then he kicks inside when the nickel is on the field and Sidney Jones comes in at left corner. And those guys won't rotate to the other side. As we get later into the summer and you start talking about getting down to 53, he'll start mixing more of that in, trying to see if guys can be a little bit more versatile. But for now, they have enough depth where you won't see guys flipping sides and changing positions. It'll be staying on your same side. For Jalen, that's the left corner. For Ronald, that's the right corner. For the backups, Avante, left corner. Rasul, right corner.
You think about overall that secondary. We talked about it some yesterday, John. You know, the cornerback position is definitely one we're all going to be watching intently because, you know, look, Sidney Jones, he hasn't lived up to expectations yet. Mills coming off an injury. Darby coming off an injury. Avante Maddox, great year last year. Rasul Douglas, you know, with a new physique, looks more like DK Metcalf than anything else. And then you have Kevon LeBron, Mr. Reliable. So, you know, I think that a lot of people are going to be watching very closely what happens with these corners.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big summer for Sidney Jones, and I do think, you know, today was an indication that things haven't changed from the spring, and Avante Maddox is ahead of Sidney Jones. So, I mean, that's obviously a bit of a disappointment, at least from the perspective of what Sidney was supposed to be coming out of the draft as a potential number one pick before the Achilles injury, and he hasn't lived up to that yet. So last year they threw him into the slot early in the season, and that's a position he's not necessarily comfortable with. So I do think he's an outside corner. I do think the Eagles have finally figured that out and will try to let him compete on the outside, and hopefully things take off. And if they do, he's got the kind of talent to push for significant playing time.
Also, some secondary observations from camp was it was Jenkins and Sendejo in the first team safeties as Rodney McLeod is progressing. What is the status of McLeod?
Well, Rodney's one of those guys, similar to what we just talked about. He's coming off ACL surgery as well. So he's not on the PUP list. He's active. He's working in individual drills. He had gotten to that point actually back in the spring as well. Remember, he got injured early in the season. I think it was week 3. So he's had more rehab time. He's a little bit ahead of some of the other injuries from a timetable standpoint. So he'll be back at some point. He's expected to be back for week 1. No questions there, but there's no need to push him. And the Eagles signed a veteran safety who's got a lot of experience playing on a very good defense, and they're comfortable. I mean, that's one of the things that Jim Schwartz always wants, and people forget already, you know, how much he leaned on Corey Graham as a veteran player to be that third safety. That's what Andrew Sendejo is. And if something does happen with Rodney McLeod and the rehab doesn't progress as well as we expect it to, he's a good safety net. He's played a lot of football on, as I said, a really good defense, a starter on a top 5 defense 3 different times. So he can play.
John McMullen joining us, the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN for all your Eagles and NFL coverage. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. Speaking of Twitter, John, the vibe I'm getting from the Twitter sphere from you and all of your Eagles colleagues is Carson Wentz looked good today.
Yeah, I mean, Carson's Carson. He's a really good quarterback. So, I mean, generally you see some peaks and valleys. I mean, today was a 10-10-10 practice, so it's not necessarily a competitive environment as people usually understand it. The defense is just showing looks for the offense and vice versa. So this is one of those practices you don't garner a lot. But I will say this. If you see, as a reporter, a good throw at Eagles camp and your nose was in your phone or your notebook, you can get a pretty good guess that Carson's the one throwing it because the other three quarterbacks are not in his league.
John, anything from Doug Pederson's presser today stood out to you? You know, from what I heard earlier today, you know, he gave a lot of the typical what I would expect to hear from Doug kind of answers. Did anything stand out to you?
Well, he handled the expectations. I mean, he got flooded with those types of questions, and rightfully so. I mean, there are high expectations for this team. And, look, as a coach, you don't want to hear that, especially on the first day of training camp. So I'm a little surprised how well he took them all, to be honest. And he realizes there is a lot of pressure on this team to perform and to succeed at a high level. So I asked him about how that affects his job as a coach, because there are different stages. If you enter the season as the Miami Dolphins, for instance, well, you're not getting to the Super Bowl. You can spin it as nicely as you want, but you just don't have the talent. So coaches across the league are in different circumstances, and I wanted to see if Doug handled that any differently, of being the coach of a favorite as opposed to a team that's not very good or a team that's an underdog. And he gave a little bit of an answer, more of a cliche. You try to handle things day by day, and that's how you have to take it. And I joked about it at the beginning of the conversation, but it is. I mean, you can only deal with what's in front of you. And for right now, for the Eagles, that's getting better at training camp.
Some other news around the NFL, John. We have 5 guys currently not reporting to camp right now. You have Ezekiel Elliott. Still has one more day to actually report, but he was not on the team flight to Oxnard, California. Michael Thomas not showing up. Melvin Gordon holding out. Ngakoue holding out with the Jags. Trent Williams with the Redskins. Of those 5, is any of those guys surprising to you?
No, nobody's surprising. I mean, players don't have a ton of leverage in this league when it comes to contracts. And when you're a good player and you overperform or outperform your contract, team generally doesn't come to you and say, well, we're going to give you more money. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes you get an extension, but it's rare, and it's especially rare when you're under contract and they have you under their control. So, hey, and Ezekiel Elliott's and Melvin Gordon, they happen to play at a position that's devalued. So you have to use every avenue at your disposal to try to get these deals, and we'll see how long it is. Unfortunately, they can't. You start to get fined at this point. You also have to be wary of the date you have to report to have an accrual season toward free agency. So it's difficult for the players, and it's really just an indication that, look, you have to do something. You have to tweak my contract. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, John, I was, Jeff and I were talking earlier about the Cowboys situation. I am a little surprised the Cowboys still have not given an extension deal to any of their 3 big offensive guys, Dak Prescott, Elliott, and Amari Cooper. I felt like this offseason they would have given a deal to at least one of them, and now with all 3 of them not having contracts, the potential that Elliott might be holding out, it does have a feel of, do the Cowboys really know what they're doing?
You know, I think they know what they're doing, but they're in a tough spot. I think they know quarterbacks are going to get a lot of money. I think they made a mistake by waiting on Dak Prescott. Now you have the Carson Wentz extension, and that's what the Eagles tend to do, is act early, and they tend to get a bargain. You know, it's hard for people to understand that that contract is a bargain, but it is from a team standpoint. And, you know, from the Cowboys' perspective, they know Dak's a good quarterback, but he's not a great quarterback, and they have to give him great quarterback money, so it's difficult to cobble together a contract. Then you have Elliott, who is the important one. He is the most important one. And it's the problem there is it's at a position, as I said, that's devalued. You understand, especially the history of that position, of players who touch the football as much as Ezekiel Elliott does.
Right.
So you have to be wary of that. And then you have to say to yourself, this is the second deal for a running back. Yeah, he's the most important guy on our team and the most important guy to our offense, but how long is that going to last? So it is a really difficult negotiation, Ezekiel Elliott. And it's rare for teams to be built around a running back in today's NFL. You don't want to be in that position, and that's the position the Cowboys are in.
Where do you think that also leaves Amari Cooper? They give up a lot of draft picks to get him, and, okay, they got to take care of Elliott, they got to take care of Dak. Where does that leave, you think, Amari Cooper at this point?
Well, I mean, Amari's a good player, and he was had a real big impact on the Cowboys last season after he was acquired. So he's going to get a significant deal. But I think if you look at those players, he's clearly number 3 on the list. Now, he plays a position that is more valuable than running back. But again, it's weird for the Cowboys because generally a receiver of that caliber is going to be a bigger deal for you than a running back. But in Dallas, that's not the case because I would argue they have the running back, the best running back in the NFL, and the only running back. You've seen it. I mean, we've seen Ezekiel Elliott be suspended. The Cowboys stink without him, and they're really good with him. And that's no coincidence.
John, one more NFL, broader topic before I let you go. You mentioned about the fact that the Eagles went 10 on 10 today. The comment from Jamal Adams yesterday about Adam Gase, he told Diana Rossini of ESPN that Gase is so competitive. It's interesting to see how different head coaches handle different teams, different situations, whether it's a first-year coach or an experienced coach or a coach in their third year. Just talk a little bit about, John, just a macro perspective on, each coach kind of has to do their own thing with their team, and not all training camps are one and the same.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and I talked about it before with teams and expectations, and they're in different spots. And when you're a first-year head coach, you generally have to go in with a different mindset and sort of be the new sheriff in town, sort of lay down the law and say, this is the way things are going to be. So that's different than a veteran coach that's been in the city for a number of years. And Doug is now year 4, and he's won a Super Bowl. So he's got that cachet as well. You're not going to see a 10-10-10 practice, which is basically 10 minutes for the offense to work on what they need to work on, 10 minutes for the defense, then 10 minutes for the special teams, and you rotate. Generally, you're going to have a more competitive practice to kick things off, but that's not the case for the Eagles because they're a veteran team. They're trying to ease their way into it. They still do have a lot of injured players, even though there was a lot of positive developments on that front and guys working in individual drills. So he's learned, and that's one of the things Doug talked about, and I wrote about on 973ESPN.com. He knows sort of when to put the foot on the gas and when to take it off, and he's very good at it. So you have to give him credit for it, and Adam Gase, he's still got to prove himself.
Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen for all your Eagles NFL news and for full wall-to-wall coverage of Eagles training camp. Today was just day one. John will be there each and every day. Follow all his coverage at 973ESPN.com. John, you won't be talking to me tomorrow, so don't be too disappointed.
I'm going to be disappointed. And you got to read those transcripts, Josh. Come on.
I will endeavor to get somebody to actually get me the transcripts each day because I don't always get them directly. So.
Oh, okay. Well, that explains it.
So talk to you later, John.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Everyday football at 4. John McMullen here on 97.3 ESPN. Each and every day we get all the Eagles and NFL news and notes from John McMullen. And again, check out all of his work at 97.3ESPN.com. And don't forget the 97.3 ESPN mobile app.